This is my story. But most of all, this is the greatest story ever told. This is God's story. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king." When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass in front of Samuel, but Samuel said, "The Lord has not chosen this one either." Jesse then had Shammah pass by, but Samuel said, "Nor has the Lord chosen this one." Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to him, "The Lord has not chosen these." So he asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" "There is still the youngest," Jesse answered. "He is tending the sheep." Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives." So he sent for him and had him brought in. He was glowing with health, and he had a fine appearance and handsome features. Then the Lord said, "Rise and anoint him. This is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David.
There's a famous, legendary story told of a marriage on the Hawaiian island of Oahu many years ago. It was customary in that day to offer a dowry of cows to the father of your prospective bride. The standard price was 3 cows. Now, if the daughter was a special catch, she might fetch 4 cows. There was rumor that one father in a distant past received an unfathomable 5 cows for his amazingly gorgeous and charming daughter. Well, as legend goes, Sam Carew had 2 daughters. Now, his eldest daughter was not considered very beautiful by the islanders. The father determined years before that he would not likely fetch 3 cows for her. He dreamed of 2, but would settle for 1. As a matter of fact, if push came to shove, he would let her go for no cows at all to lighten the financial burden of taking care of her. Well, fortunately, his younger daughter was a definite 3-cow girl. One day, the richest man on the island, a man named Johnny Lingo, paid Sam Carew a visit. Everyone knew he was going to ask for one of his daughters in marriage. Everyone assumed it was for the younger daughter. But to the surprise of the whole town and to the dad's delight, he came a-calling for his eldest daughter. He thought to himself, "I'm going to get 3 cows for her after all." Then he let his imagination get the best of him, and he thought he might receive the all-time offer of 5 cows. You can imagine the shock when the rich suitor brought 10 cows for his daughter. When they came back from a 2-year-long honeymoon, the villagers were struck by the difference in her presence. She was strikingly beautiful, graceful, poised, confident, and self-assured. Everyone thought Johnny got a bargain, paying only 10 cows for her hand in marriage. Johnny looked at Sam's oldest daughter from a different angle than her father and the other villagers. He looked beyond her outward appearance and saw the beauty of her heart and character. The moment he paid 10 cows, she became a 10-cow wife. And this is precisely what's going to happen to a young boy named David in chapter 11 of the story. Here's the setting. In the previous chapter, we learned that Israel wanted a king so that they could be like the other nations. They selected Saul, a man of standing, impressive young man without equal among the Israelites, a head taller than any of the others. A 5-cow king for sure. Unfortunately for the people of Israel, Saul didn't align his life and reign to the upper story of God. His disobedience sent a very contradictory message about the nature and character of the God of Israel. Instead of the surrounding nations seeing God as holy, just, loving, full of grace, through Saul's leadership, they saw him as cruel and greedy. And God communicated to the prophet Samuel that it was time to find another king, one who would represent God's heart and God's passion. On the direct order of God, Samuel was sent to the house of Jesse from Bethlehem, and one of Jesse's sons would become the next king of Israel. Samuel filled his horn with oil and left for what appeared to be a fairly straightforward assignment. When Samuel arrives, Jesse lines up his 7 sons from the oldest to the youngest. And Samuel goes through the lineup, but he doesn't anoint any of them as the next king of Israel. Samuel, perplexed, asks, "Are these all the sons you have?" Unbelievably, Jesse admitted he had an 8th son named David, but didn't think to bring him off the field from tending the sheep because he couldn't see him as even a possibility. The Hebrew word Jesse uses to describe his youngest son is our English word runt. Like Sam Caru's daughter, David was the runt of the litter, a good boy, but would barely fetch a single cow. David came in from the field to meet the famous prophet, and before he knew it, oil poured down his head. God confirmed David would be the next king of Israel. Now at that time, David was a mere 16 years old. And there's a difference between being anointed as king and being inaugurated as king. David was the pick of God, but he would have to wait for a date in the future to actually become the king. However, we are told from the time that David was anointed with oil that the Lord was with him. And that's a big deal. With God working through young David, he finds himself saving Israel by taking out a 9-foot Philistine giant named Goliath. We find him joining Saul's army and being so effective as a warrior that the people begin to cheer David's success over Saul's. And Saul gets jealous, and he seeks to remove David, to actually kill him. And for the next 14 years, Saul tracks David down as a fugitive. David has many low moments in those 14 years where he wants to give up. But in the end, he grows, and he learns to trust in God. He records his deepest thoughts in his journal, which we call the Psalms today. Here are a couple of entries from his journal from that time. Let me read from the story. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from the words of my groaning? I am a worm and not a man, scorned by men and despised by people. All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. I can count all of my bones. People stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among them and cast lots for my clothes. Who would give even one cow for a worm? In the lower story, David felt like a failure. But this is not how God saw him from the upper story. From God's seat, he saw a different kind of David than his father, his brothers, King Saul, Goliath, and even David himself. When Samuel saw Jesse's older son, he thought he looked like a king on the outside. God interrupted Samuel with this comment of correction. Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. David might have been considered a runt by his father on the outside, but God examined his heart on the inside and beheld a giant. You know, frequently a person puts on a show when they're in public to win the approval of people, or to portray an image not exactly accurate of who they really are. God, however, peers at our actions when no one else is looking. When David was out all alone in the hills, shepherding his dad's small flock of smelly sheep, God observed him from above. What God viewed day after day caused him to select this young man as the next king of Israel. The integrity in David's heart manifested itself when no one was looking, and it caught God's attention. Listen to Psalm 78. He chose David his servant and took him from the sheep pens, From tending the sheep, he brought him to be the shepherd of his people Jacob, of Israel his inheritance. And David shepherded them with integrity of heart, with skillful hands he led them. You see, Israel needed a king who had a heart overflowing with integrity. This kind of king would reflect the nature and character of God and cause not only the Israelites, but the surrounding nations to want to follow this God. So if David is God's number one pick, why did he allow King Saul to stay in office and chase David around the world for 14 years? The answer is simple, and the same one we found in Joseph's story. To grow David up so he could handle the pressures of shepherding an entire nation. You see, it's one thing to shepherd a small flock of sheep. It's another level altogether to shepherd a nation. Essentially, God put David through a spiritual boot camp to chisel him and to refine him into the kind of man who would truly trust in God. Now, it's interesting to note that on several occasions, Saul had a change of heart and wanted to make peace with David. However, God didn't allow it. We are told it was God who hardened Saul's heart toward David. And at some point in Saul's reign, his continual pattern of disobedience crossed the line. And God looked into his heart the same way he did with David's, and he saw a lack of integrity. Saul's new mission in life became to leverage his jealousy and his lack of integrity to equip David to handle disappointment and to trust in God. Let this be a reminder to us that God can use our disobedient lives as effectively as he uses our obedient lives in the lower story to work out his upper story plan. However, we will miss out on the rich blessing that comes to those who follow God's will. 14 years later, David became the king of Israel, and a good king he was. Later in the story, we're given this assessment of David's reign. For David had done what was right in the eyes of the Lord, and had not failed to keep any of the Lord's commands all the days of his life. A number of years ago, a Christian artist sang a song about David that went like this. When others see a shepherd boy, God may see a king. Well, here's another way to say it. When others see a 1-cow boy in the lower story, God may see a 10-cow king from the upper story. But there's more. There's more going on in David's story that points us to God's upper story plan to get us all back. David was referred to as God's anointed one. Those two words in English, in our English language, is the Hebrew word Messiah. David was the Messiah in the lower story. His righteous reign pointed us to the Messiah in the upper story. God is looking for more Davids today. People that the world may consider to only fetch 1 cow, but God sees a 10-cow potential in them. That canon should be said of us as we seek to align our lives to God's upper story plan. We too, like David, can point people toward the one true Messiah.